Hello guys and welcome to part 5 of What If Issei Was in Aincrad. If you are enjoying the series as usual, please show the author of the story support. Links will be in the description. I am putting a few chapters into this video given that some of them are very short. Anyways, I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 4, Floor 11 Part 1. The deadliest floor. 5 blue lines traced the path of a near-invisible sword as Asuna unleashed Neutron to finish off the 10th floor's boss. The sound of shattering polygons was masked by the cheering of the 48 players who had arrived here at the boss room with the goal of reaching the 11th floor. They had plenty of reason to cheer. Since that disastrous first month, things were finally picking up pace. There hadn't been a single casualty for the last 3 boss battles. Also, more people were working to join the front lines. Inside, Asuna smiled. Things had finally begun to look brighter for the residents of Aincrad. With this battle, 10% of the floating castle had been conquered. The one cheering the most was the rambunctious man with the bandana, Klein. He and his friends were very nearly dancing in victory. Honestly, Asuna thought, are they just trying to be jokers? She herself was keeping herself composed. Already people had started looking to her as a sort of leader, so she decided she had to project the calm image people expected of leaders. Of course, that didn't mean she didn't feel exhilaration at having come this far. As Asuna watched, Klein detached himself from his group of friends, who had also formed a guild named Aincrad. She laughed when she heard Klein announce himself as the leader of a guild named as such, and went over to the one person who was staring at the large doors, not taking part in the celebrations. That person, dressed all in black, his new weapon Queen's Knight sword slung over his back, was obviously Kirito. While he always took part in the clearing raids, and was undoubtedly one of the strongest players on the front lines, he never mingled with the others. His status as a beater had made him the most detested player in Sao. However, his strength still acquired some grudging respect from few, although, as far as Asuna knew, Kirito only had friends in her, Klein, Agil, who had set up a small shop, and the information broker Argo. Kirito normally would be the first one through the doors once a boss was defeated, but here he was, just standing in front of the doors with a serious expression. As Klein drew near to Kirito, Asuna also approached them. Oi, Kirito, Klein said loudly. What are you serious for? Come on, join in the celebration. Kirito didn't reply, and instead walked slowly to the door. Reaching it, he drew his sword and slammed it against the frame. The clanging noise silenced everyone as they looked at the swordsman in black with varying expressions. You guys, Kirito began, listen up. Where you're standing right now is as far as the beta testers ever got. You know what that means? He turned around and looked at them, a rare grim expression on his face, and pointed his sword at the doors. It means that beyond those doors is completely uncharted territory. From here on out, things are gonna be much harder than before. You looking down on us, you rotten beater? Said a spiky-haired male Asuna had come to completely detest. Kibao had not changed a single bit since the first floor and seemed to have more interest in bad-mouthing beta testers than clearing the game, although, since he had sufficient strength, he was a necessary player for the front lines. No information, Kirito said, silencing him. No guidebooks, no monster description lists, nothing. Whatever knowledge I didn't bother sharing with the rest of you doesn't matter anymore. Past the door, every one of us is walking blind. If you're up for it, then that's fine. If not, you might as well leave. Asuna sighed. Does he have to play up his role of arrogant beater at every chance he gets? It was easy to see the players weren't convinced. Mutters broke out among them. How do we even know whether the beta ended on the 10th floor? He might be lying, and probably is trying to get the good spots on the next floor to himself. The mutters died out and an uncomfortable silence hung over the players. Geez, Kirito, did you have to go and do that? Klein grumbled, rubbing the back of his head. Oh, for crying out loud, Asuna said, walking past him and opening the doors. If we wanted drama in Aincrad then we would have an acting skill, Kirito-kun. Unlike usual, behind the doorway was a stairway leading to a cavern-like passage. Grumbling mentally about Kirito's antics, she walked up the stairs. Asuna and Klein can say that all they want, but acting that tough is ridiculously hard. It's not just to increase my reputation as an evil beater. It's not just to keep the other testers away from their detest. It's also to make sure a third person doesn't try and slip a paralyzing potion into my drink at the inn. If I don't do that much to try and scare them, at one point they might even throw me into jail. I turned my back to the other players to hide my sigh, and followed Asuna up the stairs. I got a strange feeling of achievement. I didn't know where the 700 surviving beta testers were, but once again I had gotten ahead of them. The stairs were shorter this time. Like always, there were 48 steps. This time they spiraled so much you could see the cavernous passageway above. I decided I wanted the first look at the 11th floor, so I raced up the stairs, hoping to get there before Asuna did. I seemed to have forgotten that she had already obtained the nickname of Flash. Entering the passageway, I noticed that it bent to the left after a distance. Turning at that point, I noticed that it bent again towards the right. Asuna stood there, staring at the tunnel's opening with, "Was that shock? Hey, what are you all astonished about?" I refused to believe what my eyes were showing me. The first floor of Aincrad, Starting City, had been a mashup of just about everything. The landscape was erratic, and all in all, it was like a small game in itself, like an introduction to Sao. The monsters had massive variety among them. The second floor had been a mountainous region with monsters that were mostly beasts you would find in the wild. The third floor was a foggy area where even map data would not help you much. The monsters started becoming more humanoid, and in general was where I thought Sao had begun. Every floor afterward up to the 10th had followed specific themes. The 11th floor did so as well. However, what I was staring at could not have been more out of place. The key color was red. Everything was in some shade of red or the other. There was no sky. Instead, a red-brown cave roof held up by massive rock pillars served as a sky. Ravines and cliffs were found whichever way I turned my vision. That wasn't the most striking part though. The 11th floor looked like the inside of a gigantic volcano. No, it was worse. Lava flowed wherever I looked, between cliffs, flowing from a crack high up near the end of the massive cavern, forming rapid rivers in between ravines. Rickety wooden bridges were built across the steeper cliffs. 5 foot wide rocks flowed with the lava rivers, seemingly to serve as stepping stones to get across. And in the center of one extremely large lake of lava, was an island with dilapidated buildings made from black marble and stone. Right at the center of the island was a tall white spire, at the top of which something glinted. All this was about 50 foot below us, and to get down we had to scale a cliff with narrow rocky paths. Klein and the others soon arrived to find us frozen on the spot. They too looked and they too could not breathe. "What the hell?" Klein said quietly. "What the hell is this?" Nobody replied to his words. I was thinking only one thing. After we had managed to clear a 10th of Aincrad, was this Gaoba's way of mocking us, of showing us just what we were up against? Everything on this floor looked designed to kill an unwary player. As 48 people gathered in silence, a geyser erupted near one of the bridges. Lava sprayed over it, melting through the wood. Even as the splinters fell into the rivers of fire below, the bridge began repairing itself. I took a step forward, out of the passage. Immediately a grim BGM began playing. Words flashed across my vision. Aincrad 11th floor, Ragnarok Isle. The 48 members of the clearing party did not run into any monsters on the way to the town. However, 3 players had died just trying to get there. The 11th floor, Ragnarok Isle, was designed to kill players with almost every aspect of its landscape. The first person died when we were crossing the river. The moving 5-foot wide stepping stones were not very difficult to navigate if you were fast and extremely careful. However, one person tripped and fell into the rapid lava flow, and in seconds was carried away, screaming, his HP rapidly dropping. We only barely made out the blue polygons scattering amongst all the red. Afterwards, during the time when we were crossing a bridge, a geyser erupted and splashed over 2 other players. The wood below them melted and they fell into the rapid lava stream hundreds of feet below. The rest of us barely hung on, and watched as the bridge repaired itself, making what happened seem like a lie. It was a grim party who finally arrived at the island town right in the center of the floor. 45 grim players stood at the transfer gate, a heavy atmosphere hanging over us. "Hey, Beater," Kibao spoke up suddenly. "Did the test really never reach this far?" "We'd just found the boss room of the previous floor when it ended." Kibao seemed to be considering whether to believe me or not. Apparently he decided on the former, and then shrugged. "Say, do we have to open this gate?" Asuna said suddenly. All of us turned to look at her. She returned our stares and continued. "Most of the players who are gonna come through that gate probably don't have that much strength or experience. If they walk around carelessly on this floor, I don't think many of them will want to even leave this town." I told her, and I'm pretty sure once most of them has had a look around, they'll go back down. After a while Agil decided that he would activate the gate, go through it to the previous floor and tell everyone who was waiting to explore what exactly the 11th floor held in store for them. The rest of us went searching for hints. Nobody felt like looking through the dungeons at the moment. The monsters of the 11th floor were weak, and at the same time ridiculously strong. It was also the terrain that made any and all battles outside the inner area all the more dangerous. The first thing I met was the level 12 monster Magmeba. In appearance, it was just like the slimes you battle in normal games, except made of lava, and it had a spherical rock core inside its body. The easy part? They had low HP and were somewhat slow in movement. The hard part? Where to start? Firstly, the lava that made up their bodies damaged players on touch, so even without attacking they could damage unwary players. Secondly, their attacks were slow, but powerful and had a wide range. Thirdly, their attacks, along with everything else on this floor, had the chance of inflicting a burn condition. It did worse than merely having the attack. What it did was blur your vision and make the part of your body that had been struck more vulnerable to damage. Fourthly, they couldn't be damaged. Slicing through the lava only damaged the weapon's durability. A player had to strike straight through the core. Last was the most annoying aspect of it. Suppose a player managed to land a clean hit on it, chopping its core in half. Like a reproducing amoeba, it would split into two, the sum of whose stats equaled that of the original one. They didn't have equal stats, so it was possible for one to get most of the defensive strength and the other to get most of the offensive strength. The only way to properly kill it without first letting it reach its limit of 8 fractions was to use a 2-hit sword skill, or just cut the core twice before it split, very fast. Trying to use sword skills would be extremely dangerous when traveling alone. That problem was avoided by Asuna ordering all the frontliners to always work in parties and then specifically ordered me to form a party with her. I tried to say I'd be fine on my own, but after sending me the request she nearly dragged my hand to the accept button, and would have if I hadn't agreed. What she had said was, "As idiotic as you are, you're one of the strongest players we've got, so don't go off dying to some random mob on this floor." I was about to make some wisecrack or another, but her glare shut me up. 5 days passed without much happening. We had almost completely cleared the dungeon, which was inside the walls that surrounded the 11th floor, specifically the north side, but there was no sign of the boss room. It was around then that I first heard about the Crimson Knight. Chapter 5, Floor 11 Part 2. The Crimson Knight. The last Magmeba was cut down in 2 rapid strokes by the blonde-haired swordsman. Having defeated the current mob, Kibayato sighed and lowered his sword. "Not fast enough," he muttered, and sheathed his silver blade. Looking around and seeing nothing else, he sat onto the hard rock, waiting for his HP to heal and the next group of monsters to arrive. He should not have been hit. He should have been able to easily avoid any and all attacks those monsters threw at him. He was a knight. He could not allow himself to be struck so easily. Even in this game, he had foregone boosts to end and vit and focused most on ATK and SPD. He had considered boosting luck as well, but decided that he would not try to depend on chance. And yet even so, where in the real world he should have been able to cut down 10 of the monsters in a second, here it took him far longer, and he even got struck in the process. 1 or 2 he could still take down flawlessly, but numbers over half a dozen always landed a blow on him. It should not have happened. It happened, however, because the game was limiting him, and as such, he worked every day by himself to bring himself back to that level. Kiba had told both his master and his sensei that he would use the game to become more skilled. Yet if he was being restrained in it, how could he hope to accomplish that? Of course, he wanted to get out of the game, But he did not want to leave having accomplished nothing. He did not want to go back and tell Ryaz, "I'm sorry, but I couldn't get stronger." It would be unbearable. His HP having fully recovered, the annoying burn condition having lifted, and no monsters having appeared yet, Kiba got up and decided to move to a different spot. And that was when he heard the sounds of a fight happening not too far from him, mixed with voices. Don't they know excessive sound will only attract more monsters? Kiba thought, shaking his head. It looked like he might have to rescue yet another party of players. The sounds were coming from behind a massive 10-foot-high dark red boulder. Kiba stopped at the edge and peered around the corner. What he saw nearly made his jaw drop. There were only 2 players and over a dozen monsters. Kiba thought it was only because he had the reflexes of a devil that he had managed to survive battling 10 at once. Yet here were 2 players who were taking down monsters with ease as more appeared from around. And once more, they still had the time to argue while doing so. "You idiot, why couldn't you just try and take them out one at a time?" A brown-haired player, a female player, yelled at the other player, a black-haired male. "I was sure I could have gotten them both at the same time." "And what about you? How'd you miss killing those ones?" "I only missed because you made that one split and it attacked me." "You think I could land a hit on the others while trying to steer clear of that one? Is it my fault that you're jabbing at them? You're supposed to kill them at once with 2 quick strokes, not jabbing away at the core and reducing their HP bit by bit. That's easier for me with a rapier." "Forget about what's easy or hard, will you? On your left." Saying those last words, the black-haired swordsman turned to his right and swung his sword, which began to glow a poisonous green. At what seemed like the same instant, the sword cut towards the right and towards the left. While he did so, the female player's thin sword shone a neon blue and what looked like 5 beams of light dug into the core of another monster. Both monsters shattered, freezing for a second due to having activated a sword skill. They continued striking down the Magmebi with seeming ease. It was then Kiba noticed something he should have noticed long ago. Realizing it, his first question was, how? The 2 players were moving with a speed Kiba had still yet to achieve in-game, a speed that far outstripped his own. As far as he knew, his constant training and stat boosts to speed should have made him one of, if not the most, fastest player in Aincrad. Added to his devil reflexes, it should not have been possible for anyone else to reach a speed like that. And yet the 2 players here were moving much faster. The female player, wearing light magenta leather armor, was moving her blade so fast that even Kiba's eyes only caught the afterimage. She was going on an all-out offensive, not letting the monsters even get close to her before a barrage of white lights struck them down. The male player, who was wearing a black long coat, was even more shocking. He too went on the offensive, but his heavier blade should have restricted his motion. It did to an extent as some monsters got past it and tried to attack, but as if he knew the precise moments when they would do so, he struck back instantly. That was how fast he reacted. Against 1 or 2 he may have been able to predict their movements, but against 6 or 7 it would take much more than that. It would require inhumanly fast reflexes. Are they devils like me? Kiba wondered. After all, if he was here in the game, that meant it was likely there were others too. He knew the game could not have been of human origin, otherwise his master or her brother could have gotten him out. But he did not know whether or not he was the only devil trapped in the game. Watching the scene in front of him, he decided to believe in the former. It was a matter of seconds before almost all the monsters were down. He saw the 2 players unleashing sword skills one last time and 2 more monsters shattering into polygons. They froze again, but this time they would not get so lucky. There were 2 monsters, one behind each of them, who were about to launch their attacks. Kiba drew his sword and dashed forward immediately, reaching the first monster behind the black-clothed boy. He probably wasn't even 15, Kiba realized. He dug an X shape into its rocky core, running straight through the dispersing polygons at the second monster. He swung his sword to the right, and in the same motion spun around and landed a second vertical slash a millisecond before it began to split. The sound of a dying monster echoed off the massive rock. As a small part of Kiba wondered at how much detail was put into this virtual world. Sheathing his sword, he turned to face the 2 players. When the 2 of us were able to move again, we turned to look at the new rival who had probably saved us from near death. Once the burn condition took effect, it was immensely hard to keep fighting and was very easy to get damaged. A blonde-haired boy in light armor looked back at us. He looked to be around the same age as me, and like me, had a long sword at his side. I wore mine on my back, but whatever. The armor was crimson spurs, a lightweight armor that boosted your speed, but didn't add much to your defense. The sword was a silver slasher, the 11th floor shop's ordinary weapon, basically a leveled up version of the beginning iron sword. So then, who are you? I asked. Kiba. You? Hey, come on. I already had one idiot with me who used her real name for her in-game handle. As if she had heard my thoughts, I felt the said person staring daggers at me. I'm Kirito. This here is Asuna, who incidentally also used her real name here. If we were inside the inner area, she would have no doubt punched me for that. Right now, she had to settle for increasing the intensity of her glare. She shook her head once, and said, "You really don't know how to introduce people properly, do you? Well, anyway, I'm Asuna, and the two of us are clearers." She faltered at that point, having noticed something. I looked back at Kiba and noticed it too. The normally plain red armor had some sort of magic circle or something drawn onto the breastplate and the shoulders. Kiba noticed where we were looking and said, "Oh, this thing allowed you to customize its appearance. You could draw any sort of pattern you liked on it. Drawing a magic circle won't exactly improve your skills, you know. Even though it's an RPG, it's rare in the sense that there's no magic system." Kiba looked at me for a second and then sighed. "I know that much. I just felt like putting my own mark on it." Something nagged at the back of my head after hearing that and looking once more at the crimson armor. Then it came to me. "Ah, you're that guy that there's been all those rumors about." Asuna glanced at me once, before she too seemed to understand. "That's right," she said, "a Crimson Knight training by himself in the dungeons, always saving those who were in danger." Something like that, wasn't it? Yeah, to be fair, I thought it was an NPC or something. Why on earth would it be an NPC, you idiot? It was a hunch of sorts. It appears your hunch was wrong then, Kirito-kun, wasn't it? Kiba said, interrupting us with a slight smile. "I am a real player, not a knight in shining armor that keeps players alive. It would be better if something like that existed in this game." But, I smirked at that response. "Well, from what we've heard, we already have one. The only difference being it's not shining armor." Kiba chuckled at that. Asuna spoke up then. "Hey, what are you doing out here in the dungeons? For someone who seems as strong as you do, how come I've never seen you on the front lines?" "Well, I just needed to do something before I go to the front lines," he said ambiguously. "Anyways, how about joining us for now? We're gonna go ahead and clear the dungeons and hopefully find that boss room. If you've been around here a lot, then you should have a lot of map data that we don't." "Clear the dungeons?" he asked. "Yeah, it's already been a whole week, so it's high time we found that boss room." What he said next somewhat dashed our hopes. "I've been all over the outer field, and I've pretty much gone through the entirety of the dungeons inside the walls. I haven't yet found the boss room." "That can't be right," Asuna said, frowning. "Aincrad has 100 floors. Why shouldn't there be a boss room on the 11th floor? Is there some other way up? Or..." "Hold it," I interrupted. "I didn't want to think about that. That we were on a completely hopeless mission. Plus, that was absolutely impossible." "Kiba, judging by what you said, there's still a spot of the dungeon you haven't been to?" He considered it for a second, then opened his map to public view. The 11th floor's dungeon climbed upwards along passageways concealed inside the border walls. Of course, there was also the field that was enclosed by those walls, so it necessitated two different maps, one for the field outside the dungeons, and a three-dimensional map of the passageways within the northern wall. He trailed his finger through the near-complete passageway map, until he stopped at one point. "There is one corridor I haven't gone through yet," he said thoughtfully. "Perfect. Then that's where it is," I said, convinced that I was right. "So, do you want to join us in finding the boss room?" He wasn't sure. I could tell. He wanted to clear the game. I could also tell that, but something made him want to go slower. It wasn't that he liked the virtual world, so he wasn't like me who had caught myself thinking now and then like that, but something else. At least, that's what I thought. "Kiba-san," Asuna said, We're trying to clear this game so we can go back to our lives. You want that too, right? We could use any help we can get. I do want to go back, he said. It's just... No, never mind, I'll come. While we were in the dungeons, we obviously ran into a battle, and I got to see clearly just how strong he was. The first thing that I noticed was that he was fast, almost as fast as Asuna and I. Like me, he used a one-handed longsword without a shield. Like Asuna, he focused most on speed, watching his movements. However, I realized that there was more. Asuna and I were dealing with some Magmebi at our sides, while he was facing a salamander mutant, which looked like a cross between a wrestler and a yellow draconic lizard. It had high physical strength, but was very slow, so it would be a pushover for most players. What made it tough was its fire breath, which had an ever larger range than the Magmeba's attacks, and was also fast, a stream of fire that spread in an arc, which melted away at your armor, drastically reducing the durability. A player had to time his movements right and move away the instant it took a breath. A player also had to avoid excessively using sword skills, as even a second's delay could be fatal. Kiba focused on speed, so naturally he did not have much trouble warding it off. However, his motions were something I noticed to be odd. They were regular, and completely efficient. Not a single arm or leg was ever out of place, always in the position he needed them to be. The movements were clearly etched into his muscle memory, but they weren't sword skills. In fact, he didn't use sword skills, they were his own skills. 10 floors of experience shouldn't have got him to that level. No, it was definitely something he knew before he entered SAO. When fighting, Kiba gave off the impression of someone who was trained, who was experienced at using a sword. Properly experienced. Naturally, that made me curious, but at the moment I didn't have time to worry about that. I had to deal with my own opponents. A Magmeba jumped at me from the left. Keeping my wrist steady, I jabbed the Queen's Knight sword into the middle of the core, and then sharply twisted the blade. A new trick I'd picked up on how to beat them. The core crumbled to pieces right before the monster shattered, and wasting no time I slashed the blade towards 2 more approaching me from the right. Immediately after cutting cleanly through them, I activated Snake Bite to finish them off. Asuna was having no problems as she danced around the blobs of lava, avoiding their attacks as she sent stab after stab at them. Even now, seeing anything beyond the afterimage of the sword was impossible for me. Lightning fast, her sword dripped through the magma bodies of the monsters and created deep holes in their cores. After each of us had taken down our immediate concerns, we turned towards Kiba, only to see a burst of fire blast him. He dodged most of it, but I saw his HP bar drop to yellow at the corner of my vision. A small flame appeared on the HP icon, meaning he had been burned. Asuna zoomed towards the salamander, and sent about half a dozen stabs at its face. The beast roared and swung a fist at her, but she nimbly jumped out of the way. It inhaled once more, about to release another fire breath but dash. At some point, Kiba had gotten back up. He shouldn't have been able to see properly due to the burn. Even so, holding his sword in both hands, he charged at the salamander and brandished the silver slasher, gleaming in the light of the lava streams lining the cave. The salamander exhaled, and a fan of flames rushed at Kiba. Neither Asuna nor I expected what happened next. Kiba jumped to the right, and kicked off the cave wall and went straight over the flames. Bringing up his sword from the right, with both hands, he landed a clean blow straight at the monster's neck. Its HP dropped to nil, and it burst into blue polygons. Kiba dropped to his knees, disoriented due to the burn, and Asuna ran over to him, swiping down her left finger to open her menu. She handed him a blue tonic, which both healed HP and negated burn. He uttered a thank you, before drinking it. "Why don't you use sword skills?" I asked. "I was too curious. I don't want to simply leave it to the system," he said. "I want my motions to be mine." "Were you in a kendo club or something in real life, cause you give off this feeling of being experienced?" Real-life questions were a taboo, and Asuna looked at me, surprised that I'd ask that. "I suppose you could say that," he replied, smiling. "In any case, Kirito-kun, how's your condition?" I asked, surprised. "You can see the HP bar right there, you know." "Not that," she replied. "Oh, well, I'm not too tired really." Then scout ahead for a few minutes, will you? I'm going to rest for a while, and I'm pretty sure Kiba needs some too. Asuna-san, Kiba started, but was cut off. 5 minutes, Asuna said. That's all, then we'll be on our way again. In case you've forgotten, we're sitting in the middle of a dungeon. We can't stay in one place too long. There is that, she said thoughtfully. Kiba then spoke up. There's 2 corridors ahead, and one leads to a safe area. Perfect, she said, smiling. Let's take a breather there. Of course, as Asuna had put it earlier, since I wasn't tired, I had to go scout out the dungeons. The 2 corridors Kiba had mentioned, one led to the safe area, while the other was the one he had yet to explore. 3 minutes later I returned to the safe area to find them talking. Have probably done whatever they can by now, which means there's no external method of leaving here, Kiba was saying. It's been a bit over 2 months, surely Asuna-san, 2 months is a long time. If anything was possible, they would have done something by now. Yo, I said, interrupting their conversation. Talking about the outside world trying to bring us back? Yeah, that's what it was, Asuna said. I suppose I shouldn't have hoped too much that they would have found some way. Still, it's hard to believe that Kayaba took so many measures. Before the mood turned too grim, Asuna shook her head and then asked me, anyway, Kirito-kun, did you find anything? You're back pretty early, I sighed. The 2 of you better come quickly. You're not gonna believe this. Time to divulge the bad news. No way, Asuna muttered. Where is it? Where's the boss room? The last corridor ran completely straight and it had an extremely high concentration of monsters. The 3 of us had fought all the way here this time. It seemed that the more players that were in the corridor, the more monsters would spawn. I didn't have much of a hard time going through alone. But when 3 of us entered, the number of monsters rose exponentially. And where the corridor ended, was an empty cavern. No large doors, no passageway blocked by a giant rock. Nothing. An empty, black cave with one NPC sitting in a corner, sharpening a blade. This isn't possible, Asuna said, her fists trembling. We can't have come all this way just to never get any further again. I can't accept that. Kiba too was shocked at the outcome. We'd covered the entirety of the dungeon to our knowledge, and yet we still hadn't found the boss room. Could we have missed something? Is what I was thinking the first time I entered the room. Any moment now, I muttered, waiting. Then a voice broke the silence. You, strangers, what are you doing in this hell? Asuna stiffened at the voice, and turned in the direction it had come from. The NPC who was sharpening his sword looked up. The NPC looked to be around 40 years of age. His hair was unkempt, and he had stubble on his chin. His clothes were ragged but still held, and he had a thick leather belt around his waist. He also had an eye patch. At his feet were a scattered selection of items, including a very wide scabbard that held another sword. What? Asuna asked. Kiba remained silent, staring at the NPC. I asked you, what are you doing in this hell? Before Asuna spoke up, I raised a hand to silence her. Let me, I told her, and turned to the NPC. We're trying to go beyond this place, but we can't find the way to. Then you're in the wrong place. Wrong place? Kiba asked. There is no path beyond this cave that leads out of Ragnarok Isle. The passage to above is somewhere else. Where? Where's the way up? Asuna asked. The marble spire in the center of the isle. I was surprised when I first heard this. I had thought that spire was just a decoration of sorts, something to add to the scenery of the town. There were churches on the first floor, but they served no important purpose. What does the spire have to do with reaching the next floor? The NPC got up after hearing that. He dropped the stone he was using to sharpen his blade and held the sword to his side. After he stood up, we saw the lantern that was behind him. It looked like a miniature blast furnace, like the diagrams found in a chemistry book, except, it was filled with glowing and shifting magma, and we could see that, on top of the spire is a cannon aimed towards the higher west walls of this floor. Place the magma lantern behind me into the cannon, and then fire it. That will lead you to the floor above. Then, Asuna said, unsure what to say. She had reason to be. There were some NPCs in the previous floors who would attack you if you said the wrong thing during an important quest conversation. She had reason to be careful now. Then, could you give us the lantern? Caution wasn't a matter here. The NPC raised the sword and pointed it at us. The road to the next floor is extremely dangerous. It is possible that you will die easily should you face the guardian of this floor. I will not hand over my lantern to those who may lose it easily. An HP bar appeared over his head. Prove to me your strength. Defeat me, and I shall give you the lantern. Defeat me, and you can prove to me that you are strong enough to face the guardian. He stayed like that, waiting for an answer. In the silence that followed, I explained to Asuna. I turned it down the first time I was here. I didn't know how strong he was. And since we didn't find a field boss on this floor, Asuna bit her lip. Considering what I said, it was true. Every other floor except the first had a field boss which we needed to beat before we could enter the field. This floor did not have one. We thought at the time that it was just Kaaba's mercy on us on this extremely dangerous floor. Now, however, I had my doubts. Was it possible that this NPC was as strong as a field boss? With that thought in mind, I decided not to challenge him alone. We don't have a choice, do we? Asuna said, meeting my eyes with determination. This is the only way we can carry on, and 3 of us should be enough for him, even if he's a field boss. I agree with Asuna-san, Kiba said. The 3 of us should suffice against a human-like boss. A large monster would be a different story, but now it should not be too difficult. You sure you're ready? I asked them both. Truthfully, I was pumped up. Death game or not, it was still a game of sorts, and I was still going to enjoy it. I knew that wasn't the right mentality to have, but that didn't change the fact that I thought like that. Asuna smiled. Eyes fierce. Now or never, she said. Kiba smiled as well, looking eager. The 3 of us drew our weapons and turned towards the NPC. It seems you have the bravery, the NPC said, folding his right arm back and getting into position, his sword giving off a menacing glint. A name appeared over his HP bar. Thanran the warrior. Now, Thanran said, a fierce grin forming on his face. Let's see if you have the strength to back it up. And that is the end of the 2 chapters. It's a cliffhanger, I know, but it's a good way to end the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and comment what you thought. This is Ultraverse What If signing off.